It started with a single bowl of chicken stew. She didn't expect the wild eyes in the forest to return, didn't expect the claws, the growl, or the miracle. But every day after that first moment, her life changed. A woman alone in the woods, a bobcat cub on the edge of death, and a connection so deep, so unexpected, that it would survive danger, disaster, and the flames of a wildfire. What really happened when she fed that cub? Stay with us, because this story will stay with you forever. A wild beginning. Lily Morgan had always preferred the quiet. Her cabin stood near the northern edge of Olympic National Forest, nestled between dense pine groves and a winding stream that glittered in the morning light. She wasn't hiding from the world, not exactly, but the solitude gave her space to breathe. At 31, with auburn hair often pulled into a loose braid and a Nikon camera slung over one shoulder, Lily lived for the golden hours and the moments when nature let her in close. That morning had started like so many others, coffee percolating on the wood stove, boots crunching on frost-laced soil, and the steady click of her camera capturing a herd of deer grazing near the riverbank. She'd been tracking their movements for a photography series called Edge of the Wild, hoping for the perfect shot of the dominant buck. But something shifted. The deer startled, lifting their heads as one, then bolted into the trees. The forest fell still, too still. Lily lowered her lens. That's when she heard it. A sharp, pitiful cry. Not a bird, not a fox. It was something else. Something that clawed under her skin and tugged at her instincts. She stepped carefully through the underbrush, following the sound around a bend in the stream. And there, beneath a cluster of bramble, was a bundle of fur no bigger than a house cat. A bobcat cub. Its cinnamon-colored coat was mottled with mud and leaf litter. One ear was torn at the tip, and its ribs were visible even through the thick baby fur. Its short tail twitched nervously. Tufted ears flicked toward her, but the animal didn't move. For a second, neither did she. Bobcats were elusive, solitary creatures. You didn't see them, not like this. And a cub this young, alone and in such poor shape, was a sign of something gone horribly wrong. Lily crouched slowly, careful not to spook it. She reached into her backpack, pulled out the leftover chicken stew she'd packed for lunch, and set it gently on a flat rock a few feet away. Then she stepped back. The cub didn't trust her. It hissed softly, ears low. But the scent of meat was too strong. Hunger overpowered fear. It crept forward, limping slightly, and began to eat. Lily watched, heart thudding. She didn't move, didn't speak. The cub devoured the stew in seconds, then looked up at her. Not with gratitude, not with understanding, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. She stood, careful not to break the moment, and slowly walked away. Back at her cabin that evening, Lily couldn't shake the image. Those wild, desperate eyes. She'd done the right thing. Helped a starving animal. That was it. She told herself it was over. But it wasn't. Because the next morning, the bobcat cub came back. The return. The sun hadn't fully risen when Lily opened her cabin door the next morning. The scent of pine sap and morning dew filled the air, crisp and familiar. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and stepped onto the porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand. Her eyes instinctively scanned the tree-line. Habit, really, until they froze. It was there, sitting at the edge of the clearing. The bobcat cub. Its fur was still tangled, though drier now. It looked smaller in the morning light, almost fragile. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she slowly crouched, careful not to spill her coffee. The cub didn't flinch this time. It simply sat, watching her. She hadn't expected it to come back. Wild animals didn't do that. They took what they needed and vanished, like ghosts in the woods. But not this one. Without taking her eyes off it, Lily stepped back into the cabin. She pulled open the small fridge and took out a leftover drumstick from last night's roast chicken. She placed it gently on a plate and walked it to the edge of the porch. This time, the cub didn't wait long. It padded forward, cautious but determined. When it reached the meat, it looked up at her once, just once, then lowered its head and ate. Lily sat down on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, sipping her coffee. No sudden moves. No words. This wasn't a pet. It wasn't tame. But something was happening. The bobcat finished and licked its chops, then turned and disappeared into the underbrush. No sound. No trail. Gone. Lily stared at the spot where it had vanished. She didn't understand it. Not yet, but she felt it in her bones. This wasn't over. She stood slowly, her eyes scanning the trees. A breeze rustled the leaves. A bird cried overhead. And somewhere in the distance, a small shadow watched her. Patterns and bonds. The next morning, it came again. Right after dawn, as the horizon blushed behind the treetops, Lily spotted the small form slinking through the underbrush. The same cinnamon fur, the same hesitant grace, like a whisper of movement against the forest floor. The bobcat cub returned just as she'd hoped, and feared it would. Lily had left out a bowl of venison scraps she'd gotten from the local butcher in town. She placed it several feet from her porch, making sure it stayed close to the woods where the cub seemed to feel safest. Then she sat quietly on the top step, coffee in hand, eyes lowered, not staring directly, not threatening. The cub moved toward the food without the aggression of that first day. No hissing, no defensive stance. Just slow steps, cautious eyes, and an empty belly that couldn't wait any longer. Day 3, it returned again. And again the day after. A pattern formed, unspoken, unforced. At dawn, the cub would appear from the same direction. It would linger near the edge, sniff the air, then walk to the food Lily had left. Sometimes she'd whisper, just barely, "Morning, Cedar." That was the name she'd given it, Cedar, after the trees that loomed tall around her clearing, silent, steady, and ancient. She never said it loudly, never called, never moved quickly. She knew better. This wasn't a pet. This was a wild creature who was choosing her, day after day, with no obligation and no leash. The bobcat was growing stronger. The limp was still there, but less pronounced. Its coat was thicker now, with dark spots becoming more defined, ears sharper and more alert. Its eyes, golden and watchful, lingered on her longer each time. Lily had begun to journal everything. Time of appearance, what it ate, how much, any new behavior. Her notebook filled quickly. She even kept photos, taken discreetly with her long lens, capturing Cedar licking its paws, tilting its head, or blinking slowly in the late morning light. And then, without warning, Cedar started showing up in the evenings too. It wouldn't approach the porch, wouldn't even come near the food dish she sometimes left out. It just sat near the same thicket, almost hidden, but not entirely, watching her, as if guarding, or maybe just being. Lily would sit on the steps after dinner, tea in hand, the last of the light brushing her face. No words, no sound, only the wind rustling leaves and the faint awareness that somewhere out there, just beyond the shadows, Cedar was there too. Days bled into weeks, and the silence between them became a language. Sometimes Lily would laugh softly to herself, realizing how far she'd come from that first startled day by the stream. How this wild animal had not only begun to trust her, but how she, too, was slowly healing. Because what Cedar brought wasn't just companionship. It was presence. And Lily hadn't realized how much she'd needed that. Until now. The first rescue. It was nearly dusk when the scream tore through the stillness. Lily had been hiking a familiar trail, one that curved along the slope behind her cabin. She wasn't out there for work that evening. No camera, no field journal. Just movement. Just the rhythm of boots crunching soil, the wind threading through fir branches, and the quiet company of her own thoughts. She never heard the boar coming. There was a crack in the brush, a sharp snap of undergrowth, and then it charged. The wild boar was massive, with tusks like curved daggers and small black eyes filled with territorial rage. It exploded from the trees just 30 feet ahead, grunting like thunder, hooves pounding toward her. Lily froze. Too close to run. Too late to hide. Instinct kicked in. She turned sharply, trying to scramble back up the trail, but the loose gravel slipped under her boots. She fell hard, gasping as pain shot through her ankle. She couldn't stand. The boar was nearly on top of her. She screamed, and that's when the growl cut through the air like a blade. From the left, through the thick brush, came a blur of fur and fury. Cedar. The young bobcat launched itself at the boar's flank with a ferocity Lily had never seen. Not in documentaries, not in wild encounters, not even in her own imagination. The cub wasn't big, not yet, but it was fast. Its claws tore into the boar's side, its snarls high and sharp, distracting the beast just long enough. The boar spun, forgetting Lily, thrashing its head to shake off the attacker. Cedar danced backward, nimble and fierce, refusing to retreat. Lily used the moment to crawl toward a fallen tree, dragging herself behind the trunk for cover. Her ankle throbbed with every movement, but she didn't care. She could barely breathe, watching the impossible unfold before her. Cedar didn't win the fight, not in a traditional sense. After a few wild strikes, the boar managed to whip around and dash back into the forest, wounded and furious, but alive. The cub stood still, chest heaving, its coat streaked with dirt and blood. And then, silence. Lily couldn't move, could barely speak. The cub padded toward her slowly, limping again now, one shoulder lower than the other. It stopped a few feet away, and sat. Not proud, not victorious, just there. Lily blinked through tears she didn't realize had come. Her voice broke when she finally whispered, "You came for me." Cedar stared at her, tail flicking slowly. The air around them was thick with pine and tension and something sacred that couldn't be named. The pain in her ankle surged again, sharp and pulsing. She knew she'd have to get back to the cabin before dark, but her body was screaming in protest. She reached out, not to touch the cub, but to push herself up using a branch. That's when Cedar did something Lily would never forget. It moved closer, not all the way to her side, but enough to close the space, enough to be a presence. Not guiding, not herding, just steady, watching, waiting. When she finally managed to stand, wobbling on one foot, she looked down and saw those golden eyes fixed on hers. She began hobbling down the trail, clutching onto trees and rocks for support, each step slow and agonizing. Cedar followed behind, never straying far. The walk back to the cabin took over an hour. Twice she fell. Twice Cedar moved closer, never touching, never intervening, but never leaving. By the time they reached the clearing, the stars had started to blink awake in the sky. Lily collapsed onto the porch, heart pounding, tears streaking dirt down her face. Cedar sat at the edge of the woods, watching from the shadows. No longer a wild question mark in the trees. No longer just a guest. And from that night on, Lily understood. This wasn't just a pattern. This was a bond. Unwritten, unspoken, unbreakable. The edge of fear. News of the bobcat spread faster than Lily expected. It started with a single sighting. Tom Ridgway, her new neighbor who'd moved in just 2 months earlier with his 2 Labrador retrievers and a stockpile of solar panels, saw Cedar near his property line. He was hauling fencing when he spotted the cat watching from a slope near the chicken coop. At first, He'd thought it was just a large feral cat, until it flicked that stubby tail and turned its tufted ears toward him. The next day, he came knocking, and he wasn't happy. "You feeding that thing?" Tom demanded, his square jaw clenched, eyes sharp with accusation. "I saw it this morning. It was eyeing my hens. You know a bobcat can tear through fencing if it's hungry enough." Lily stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Her ankle was still wrapped from the boar incident, and Cedar hadn't left the woods for 2 days, likely recovering. "It's not bothering your coop," she said calmly. "And no, I'm not domesticating it. I just helped it once." Tom huffed. "You helped it and now it's coming back. Wild animals don't forget handouts. It's a predator, Lily. You can't play Snow White out here and expect nothing to go wrong." "I don't own it," she replied, "and I'm not training it. It just comes." "Well, if it comes near my dogs or my chickens again," Tom said, stepping back, "I'll put it down. I won't risk my property because of someone's bleeding heart." That night, Lily didn't sleep. She paced the floor of her cabin, staring out the windows every hour, searching for golden eyes in the dark. But Cedar didn't come. For 3 days. Then 4. The space outside her porch felt heavier, the forest quieter, lonelier, and Lily began to wonder if Cedar had sensed the tension, the new human scent laced with fear and threat. Wild animals knew when they weren't welcome. Maybe it had gone deeper into the forest. Maybe it had learned, finally, to stay away. But the ache that bloomed in her chest wasn't relief. It was loss. She kept walking the trail where the boar had attacked, leaving bits of food in the usual spots. Nothing was touched. She started to worry. Had Cedar's wound reopened? Was it injured again, or worse? Then, on the 5th night, she heard it. Not footsteps, not growls, just the soft crunch of twigs from the east-facing slope. And when she stepped out with her flashlight, her breath caught. Cedar stood just at the edge of the trees, thinner than before, tired, but alive. The bobcat didn't approach, didn't eat. It simply sat, stared, waited. Lily stood on the porch, clutching the railing. "He won't hurt you here," she whispered, her voice cracking. The next morning, she left a fresh piece of chicken by the tree line, but Cedar didn't come. That afternoon, Tom showed up again. "You know there's a wildlife service number for this kind of thing?" he asked, voice sharp. "That cat's gonna get someone hurt." "Someone like who?" Lily asked, biting back the emotion in her throat. "Someone like a kid riding through here on a bike. Someone like my wife walking our dogs." Lily folded her arms, voice flat. "You think if I call wildlife services, they'll gently coax a bobcat back into the mountains? They'll trap it, relocate it, maybe euthanize it." Tom didn't answer. His silence was louder than his words. She watched him walk away, a man trying to protect his land. And for the first time, Lily understood. This wasn't about Cedar being dangerous. It was about Cedar not fitting in. Just like her. Later that week, Lily took down her game cameras. She stopped leaving food. She stopped waiting. She couldn't risk Cedar becoming a target. Not from hunger, not from illness, not from bullets. Cedar would have to choose again, without help. If it came back, it would be on its own terms. And Lily, as much as it broke her, would wait. Fire in the forest. It began with wind. Not the usual soft rustle that stirred the pine branches or danced through the tall grass of Lily's meadow. This wind was dry, hot. It moved like something alive, brushing her face with the sting of distant warning. She was on the back porch splitting kindling when she first smelled it, an acrid, earthy scent that didn't belong. Smoke. She paused mid-swing, eyes scanning the tree line. At first, it was only a haze, a greyish smear floating over the western ridge like morning fog. Harmless. Familiar. Someone's campfire, maybe. But 10 minutes later, the haze thickened. Orange undertones crept into the smoke, coloring the sky with a sickly tint. The wind picked up again, sharper this time, and Lily knew. This wasn't a campfire. This was wildfire. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the county emergency alert lighting up the screen. Evacuate immediately. Level 3. West Ridge fire. Direction: eastbound. Wind driven. Zero containment. Lily's heart slammed into her ribs. She dropped the hatchet and ran for the cabin. Years of living alone in the forest had taught her to prepare for this. The bug-out bag was under the bed. Water, food bars, first aid, flares. She snatched her fireproof document case from the desk drawer and shoved it into the duffel. On instinct, she grabbed her external hard drive with all her wildlife photos. 5 years of her work stored in those blinking gigabytes. But then she hesitated. Her eyes swept the cabin. The photos, the camera, the stack of notebooks beside the window. She wanted to take everything. But there wasn't time. Outside, the wind howled again, and a flicker of flame became visible through the treetops. She ran to the porch and stopped. The tree line. She scanned it, breath held. "Cedar," she whispered, barely more than breath. "Please." No movement. No golden eyes. Just smoke rolling in waves over the grass. Lily stood there for a long, breathless moment, knowing this could be it. Then she turned and ran for her truck. She backed down the gravel road, tires spitting dust and rock. The wind pushed at the truck as she swerved around the bend, headlights cutting through the thickening haze. Ash fluttered like snow in the beams. The fire was moving faster than she could think. Downhill, against the rules of nature. That's how you knew it was serious. At the ranger station, she checked in with the incident team. Her cabin had been listed, Northern Loop, mile marker 2. Unofficial access. Limited protection. Likely loss. She didn't ask about the structure. She didn't ask about roads. She asked the only thing that mattered. "Have you seen animals near that sector?" Bobcat, juvenile, possibly injured. The young firefighter blinked, caught off guard. There were tracks. Some scat. But, "Ma'am, that area's a firestorm right now. If anything was still in there, it didn't make it out." Lily didn't respond. She just sat on the curb outside the ranger office, a fire blanket around her shoulders, her fingers black with soot and shaking. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her chest was hollow. Not for the cabin. Not even for the photos. For what she might have lost in silence. In fur. In golden eyes. And she made herself a promise. As soon as the road opened, she was going back. Not to search for her past, but for the only thing that had ever made the forest feel like home. Smoke and fur. The fire had passed. 3 days later, the road reopened under strict supervision. Lily was one of the first in line at the ranger station checkpoint. Her truck, still coated in a thin film of ash, bumped along the charred gravel as she made her way back up to the northern loop. Everything looked wrong. The trees were blackened skeletons. What used to be a lush canopy was now just a thin veil of smoke hanging like grief in the air. The silence was worse than the destruction. No birdsong, no rustling branches. Even the wind seemed hesitant to breathe. When she reached the turnoff to her cabin, her hands trembled. The cabin was still there, singed around the edges. A few shingles missing. Smoke damage, yes. But standing. Lily parked and stepped out slowly, her boots crunching over brittle leaves turned to ash. Her lungs burned with every inhale, the air still heavy with soot and memories. She made a quick lap around the structure, assessing the damage. The shed was gone, completely flattened. Her front porch had burn marks along the steps, and the swing she'd built by hand now hung by a single, half-melted chain. But none of that mattered. She turned toward the tree-lean, or what was left of it. "Cedar," she said softly, her voice hoarse. "I came back." No answer. Of course there wasn't. She walked toward the ridge behind the cabin, where the underbrush had burned away, exposing rocks and roots she hadn't seen in years. Her eyes scanned every shadow, every scorched log. Nothing. By the time the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in bruised orange, she sank down on a log and buried her face in her hands. Maybe he hadn't made it. Maybe the fire had moved faster than instincts. Maybe this was the price of connection, grief when the wild didn't return it. She didn't hear the first twig snap. She only looked up because something shifted, an instinct honed from years alone in the forest. There, on the slope. Cedar, limping, thin, covered in soot, but alive. Lily gasped, stumbling to her feet. The bobcat didn't run, didn't shy away. It moved slowly down the ridge, weaving between blackened trunks until it stood 10 feet from her. And then it did something it had never done before. It stepped into the clearing, onto her porch, and sat, right where she always used to leave the food. Lily blinked, too stunned to cry. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. She took 1 step forward, then 2. Stopped. Let the silence settle between them. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just instinct. It was choice. He had come back. Not just for food. Not for safety. But because some bonds don't burn. Not even in fire. Watchers in the trees. The world didn't return to normal. It built itself again, slower this time, with cracks in the foundation where fire had passed. Lily spent the next few weeks rebuilding, not just her home, but her rhythm. She replaced the porch swing, rewired the shed's foundation, repainted the cabin's scorched siding with leftover buckets of forest green. Each stroke of the brush felt like a breath of life she was giving back to the forest, 1 square foot at a time. But something was different now. Something quieter. She never resumed the morning feedings. Not because she no longer cared, but because she understood. What Cedar had done, returning after the fire, had sealed something sacred. Their bond was not built on food, or routine, or dependence. It had been forged in fear and flame, and whatever came next had to come freely. Still, she kept watch. Every morning, coffee in hand, she'd step onto her newly rebuilt porch and scan the tree-lean. Not expectantly, just in hope. Sometimes there was nothing but silence. Other times she'd catch a flash of movement, too large for a squirrel, too low for a deer. She never chased it, never called, but always waited. Then, one morning, something changed. She noticed paw prints, smaller than Cedar's, near the edge of the burned ridge, where the grass had just begun to return. The spacing, the shape, the weight distribution, she knew these tracks. Not one bobcat. 2. That evening, as the sky melted into shades of violet, she saw him again. Cedar, but not alone. 2 small cubs bounded clumsily behind him, their legs too long for their growing bodies, their ears tipped like little triangles, their tails twitching with curiosity. Lily froze. Not in fear, but in awe. Cedar stood still at the edge of the woods, watching her the same way he had all those months ago. And then, without a sound, he turned and nudged one of the cubs gently with his head, as if teaching it to look, to observe, to remember. The cub stared at Lily, tilting its head in the same curious way she'd once seen from its father. Then they disappeared. Not vanished, but faded into the trees, into the dusk, into the wild that had shaped them. Lily sank onto the porch steps, a tear rolling down her cheek, not from grief, but from the staggering weight of what she had just witnessed. She wasn't part of their world, but they had let her see it. Just enough. Just once more. That night, she opened her journal again. On the first clean page, she wrote 4 words. He brought them home. A story told in silence. Lily never saw Cedar up close again. Not the way she had on that night after the fire, limping, tired, and yet somehow still regal. That image, burned into her memory, remained untouched by time. But as the days turned to weeks and the weeks to seasons, Lily learned to see him in other ways. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the subtle marks he left behind. She found prints after summer rains, larger now, deeper, no longer the delicate imprints of a cub but those of a grown male. She noticed fresh scratch marks on the tall cedar trunk behind her cabin, high enough that they couldn't belong to his offspring. Once, she caught a tuft of tawny fur snagged on the edge of a low branch, and she held it in her hand like a keepsake made of trust. She stopped looking for him directly. That time had passed. Instead, she turned inward, toward what she could give, toward how she could share the story. With the photos she had taken, the journals she had filled, and the hours of footage stored on her camera traps, Lily created something bigger than herself. A living memory. A story told not through narration but through pattern, behavior, moments. She titled the project The Spirit of Cedar. It began with a gallery opening in Port Angeles, just 3 rooms tucked inside a renovated lighthouse. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few curious locals. Maybe a ranger or 2. But the response stunned her. People came. Hikers. Wildlife lovers. Children who had only seen bobcats in books. Veterans who stood for long minutes in front of the photo of Cedar standing in the fire-cleared meadow, his body rimmed with golden light. One woman wept. Lily remembered her well. She had stood silently in front of a photo of the empty clearing, where the caption read, "He never belonged to me. But for a while, he came anyway." When the woman turned, tears in her eyes, she simply said, "That's what my son was like." And Lily understood. Because Cedar wasn't just a bobcat anymore. He was loss, hope, grace. He was the presence that teaches us how to witness without owning, how to love without caging, how to say goodbye without bitterness. Back in the forest, life went on. Seasons shifted. Pine needles fell. The sound of birdsong returned with the spring. Lily built a new swing for the porch. This one faced the clearing where she had first left that bowl of stew. She would sit there in the evenings, tea in hand, watching the shadows dance at the tree line. Sometimes nothing came. Sometimes, just beyond the smoke-dark trunks, she would see movement. Ears. A flicker of fur. Eyes that glinted gold in the half-light. She never waved. Never called out. But she smiled. Because she knew. Cedar was still there. Not because he had to be. But because, once, they had met in a moment neither of them expected. And from that moment, something unbreakable had formed. A circle. Completed.